Howdy, readers. I'm Jason. This is Chapter and Verse. And as you might have guessed, I'm here this evening to do the Wear a Mask tag, which was created by my friend Brian at Bookish. So it's pretty simple. What we're intended to do is to help raise awareness of the importance of wearing masks during this shitty time that we're all living through. But then also to list 3 books that you like, in which a character does one of the following 3 things. Wears a mask, conceals something about himself or herself, or wears something protective on his or her head. So, before I get into a discussion of the books, I thought I would just talk with you guys a little bit about masks. And I'm going to take my Jurassic Park mask off now, because my glasses, as you can see, are fogging up. All right, hopefully those will clear up here shortly. Yeah, I can see the fog on them abating. Or I can just clean them on my shirt while I talk to you. So I live in Wyoming. And Wyoming, for those of you who don't know, is one of the largest states, geographically speaking. I think it's like the 4th largest state, geographically speaking, after like Alaska, Texas, and maybe Montana. I could be wrong about that. Don't quote me. But Wyoming also has the smallest population of any state in America. It's got a smaller population than Rhode Island, and Rhode Island is like the size of a postage stamp. So Wyoming is huge, and Wyoming has about 588,000 people in it. As with most things that travel to Wyoming, whether it's trends or art films, Wyoming tends to get things later than other places, and it was true of coronavirus as well. So, I mean, we've had cases for a long time, but it's only really started exploding, right? And again, this is all relative to size, the size of the state. I'm not pretending at all that Wyoming has the same problem with coronavirus that, Florida does, or Texas does, or New York did, and maybe New York is getting ready to again. But when you think about the fact that we have so few people, an explosion or a tripling of cases, which has been the case here in Wyoming in the last 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, we were seeing an average of 25 to 30 cases a day. Then it jumped up in 1 week to 50 cases a day. Then in another week, it jumped up to 70 cases a day. And now it's almost 100 cases a day. And this has happened in a very short span of time. So one thing I have been doing lately is comparing Wyoming to Vermont. Okay, so Vermont actually has almost 100,000 people more than Wyoming does. And in Vermont, Vermont's a much smaller state. And so apart from the kind of more rural areas of Vermont, people are living much more on top of each other than they are in Wyoming. It should follow, then, that Vermont has more COVID cases, or has had more COVID cases than Wyoming. But in fact, Wyoming has more than 3 times the number of COVID cases. Vermont these days is getting like 5 to 10 new cases a day. And the other day, Wyoming had 162 new confirmed cases in one day. And this is happening in large part, not necessarily because the governor hasn't shut the state down and never really did a shelter-in-place order or anything like that. He's too cowardly for that. But because most people in Wyoming are not wearing masks. Even though we have few people, population-wise, we have a greater percentage of idiots per capita in Wyoming than most any other state, maybe any other state, actually. But when you drive around, downtown, or you watch people walking into a store, etc., probably 10% of the people are wearing masks. When you go into a store that actually requires masks, that number is much greater. It's like 80% or 90%. There's still a couple of dumbasses walking around who clearly don't care about the people around them and who think that they themselves are invulnerable, but that's not the case. So, I just want to encourage people, wear a mask when you're out, when you're in a public place. Wear a mask. It's common sense. It's not rocket science or anything like this. If you're wearing a mask and you sneeze, your snot and your spray of saliva is not going to go out into the air and onto the people around you and on surfaces, etc., etc. Most of it is going to be caught in your mask. So yes, it sucks. It's an inconvenience to have your own sneeze smothered around on your face, but it's helping protect other people. Because here's the thing. A lot of the people who have coronavirus have no idea that they have it, right? And that's another thing, right? Like these people who just think they're invulnerable or whatever, they seem not to understand the notion of being asymptomatic. Again, it's not rocket science. It's not difficult to understand, but they don't get it. So I wanted to do my part here on BookTube and do Brian's wear a mask tag. Sorry for the rant. So my 3 books that I want to talk about, the first one has to do with somebody who conceals something about himself, and that is the nonfiction Devil in the White City, Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America by Erik Larson. And this is one of my favorite works of nonfiction. I'm a big fan of that kind of popular nonfiction that tells the story of a period in history or what have you. Timothy Egan's really good at it, Erik Larson, Deborah Blum. And it feels somehow more like a really good novel. They're such good storytellers, the writers of this particular kind of brand of nonfiction. And the best example of it that I can think of when you compare it with nonfiction that's much more dry and academic is Timothy Egan's book, The Big Burn, okay, which covers exactly the same material as Stephen Pyne's book, The Year of the Fires. And I read both of those, and The Year of the Fires, apart from its middle section, which is really dramatic and beautifully done, the Stephen Pyne book is incredibly dull. If I weren't so opposed to people describing books as boring, I would even say Stephen Pyne's book is a little bit boring. And when you are familiar with the material, there's no way it should be boring, right? And Timothy Egan's book, The Big Burn, is not boring at all, nor is Erik Larson's book. And this tells the story of the World's Fair in Chicago in the late 19th century. And but in alternating chapters, it also tells the story of a really sick, depraved man named H.H. Holmes. I mean, he's been described as America's first serial killer. It's crazy, but I had never heard of him before reading this book. And yeah, he was off his nut. We'll just say that. He posed as a doctor for a very long time. And he was a very good con man as well, right? And so he was able to amass a really good amount of money, and he built this hotel, and he built it with sort of secret chambers and with a soundproof room. It had a crematorium in the basement where he could dispose of his victims. He was a sick bastard, and this is a tremendous book, and he was one of the great concealers of who he really was in American history. So if you haven't read this, and I'm sure most of you probably have, it was a National Book Award finalist. I have no idea why it didn't win. It's a tremendous book. The second one I want to talk about, just briefly, is a novel by Kevin Wilson, and this is The Family Fang. And The Family Fang, they're even wearing masks. The children are even wearing masks on the cover. The Family Fang is about the family Fang, and the matriarch and the patriarch in the family are performance artists who dream up crazy stunts. I mean, crazy, dangerous stunts. And their children are kind of folded into these shenanigans as kids. And as they grow up, they're not terribly well-adjusted children. And the daughter becomes an actress, and I don't remember. Maybe the boy is a kind of a journalist of some kind. So early on in the novel, photographs of the actress's breasts are somehow leaked. I don't remember if they were, you know, snapped by somebody on the film set during a scene, or if they were stolen from her, or what have you. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but they're all over the internet. And her brother is just having a kind of early to midlife crisis of his own. And I wanted to just read a scene to you guys that is just hilarious, and it mentions Wyoming, so it gets a bonus point for that. So it's a phone conversation between the two children who are now, like I said, in their 20s or 30s. "I can't, Buster," she finally said. "I'm going to Wyoming." "Do not leave me here, Annie," Buster replied. "I'm in a weird place right now," she said. "I need to figure things out." "You're in a weird place right now?" Buster said, his voice rising. "Right now, right this very minute. I'm sitting on my childhood bed, drinking Percocet-laced orange soda out of a straw that I'm holding in the gap where my tooth used to be before it got shattered by a potato. Mom and Dad are in the living room listening to Lamonte Young's Black Record at a ridiculously loud volume. They're wearing Lone Ranger masks, which seems to be a recurring thing for them. For the past hour, I've been reading an issue of Guitar World from 1995 because I'm afraid to go on the internet and see another picture of my sister's tits." So yeah, that is the Family Fang, and it's a hilarious book. It was made into a film, I think, directed by the actor Jason Bateman, and I haven't seen the film yet. I think he plays Buster, and I want to say Nicole Kidman plays Annie, and I think Nicole Kidman is too old for that part, but maybe that's just me. And then the last book I wanted to mention is Steve Donohue's favorite novel, Blood Meridian, or The Evening Redness in the West by Cormac McCarthy. And the passage I want to read to you guys from this. So I did a video on my channel here recently where I kind of broke down my favorite sentence of all time, which was from Virginia Woolf's novel To the Lighthouse. What I'm going to read to you here is about, It's about 3 pages, just under 3 pages of prose, so bear with me. But this is probably my favorite long passage of writing in any book. I think these are 3 perfect pages of prose, just 3 perfect pages. So, and in these 3 pages, we see characters, figures wearing veils and wearing helmets, so sort of masks, and certainly things that are on their heads to protect them from injury. The first of the herd began to swing past them in a pall of yellow dust, rangy, slat-ribbed cattle with horns that grew a goggle, and no two alike, and small, thin mules, coal-black, that shouldered one another, and reared their mallet-shaped heads above the backs of the others, and then more cattle, and finally the first of the herders, riding up the outer side and keeping the stock between themselves and the mounted company. Behind them came a herd of several hundred ponies. The sergeant looked for Candelario. He kept backing along the ranks, but he could not find him. He nudged his horse through the column and moved up the far side. The lattermost of the drovers were now coming through the dust, and the captain was gesturing and shouting. The ponies had begun to veer off from the herd, and the drovers were beating their way toward this armed company met with on the plain. Already you could see through the dust on the ponies' hides the painted chevrons and the hands and rising suns and birds and fish of every device, like the shade of old work through sizing on a canvas. And now, too, you could hear, above the pounding of the unshod hooves, the piping of the quena, flutes made from human bones, and some among the company had begun to saw back on their mounts, and some to mill in confusion, when up from the offside of those ponies there rose a fabled horde of mounted lancers and archers, bearing shields bedight with bits of broken mirror glass, that cast 1,000 unpieced suns against the eyes of their enemies. A legion of horribles, hundreds in number, half naked or clad in costumes Attic or biblical or wardrobed out of a fevered dream, with the skins of animals and silk finery and pieces of uniform still tracked with the blood of prior owners, coats of slain dragoons, frogged and braided cavalry jackets, one in a stovepipe hat, and one with an umbrella, and one in white stockings and a blood-stained wedding veil, and some in headgear of crane feathers or rawhide helmets that bore the horns of bull or buffalo, and one in a pigeon-tailed coat worn backwards and otherwise naked, and one in the armor of a Spanish conquistador, the breastplate and pauldrons deeply dented with old blows of mace or saber, done in another country by men whose very bones were dust, and many with their braids spliced up with the hair of other beasts, until they trailed upon the ground, and their horses' ears and tails worked with bits of brightly colored cloth, and one whose horse's whole head was painted crimson red, and all the horsemen's faces gaudy and grotesque with daubings like a company of mounted clowns, death hilarious, all howling in a barbarous tongue and riding down upon them like a horde from a hell more horrible yet than the brimstone land of Christian reckoning, screeching and yammering and clothed in smoke like those vaporous beings and regions beyond right knowing, where the eye wanders and the lip jerks and drools. "Oh my God," said the sergeant. A rattling drove of arrows passed through the company, and men tottered and dropped from their mounts. Horses were rearing and plunging, and the mongrel hordes swung up along their flanks and turned and rode full upon them with lances. The company was now come to a halt, and the first shots were fired, and the gray rifle smoke rolled through the dust as the lancers breached their ranks. The kid's horse sank beneath him with a long pneumatic sigh. He had already fired his rifle, and now he sat on the ground and fumbled with his shot pouch. A man near him sat with an arrow hanging out of his neck. He was bent slightly, as if in prayer. The kid would have reached for the bloody hoop-iron point, but then he saw that the man wore another arrow in his breast to the fletching, and he was dead. Everywhere there were horses down and men scrambling, and he saw a man who sat charging his rifle while blood ran from his ears, and he saw men with their revolvers disassembled, trying to fit the spare loaded cylinders they carried, and he saw men kneeling who tilted and clasped their shadows on the ground, and he saw men lanced and caught up by the hair and scalped standing, and he saw the horses of war trample down the fallen, and a little white-faced pony with one clouded eye leaned out of the murk and snapped at him like a dog and was gone. Among the wounded, some seemed dumb and without understanding, and some were pale through the masks of dust, and some had fouled themselves or tottered brokenly onto the spears of the savages. Now driving in a wild freeze of headlong horses, with eyes walled and teeth cropped, and naked riders with clusters of arrows clenched in their jaws and their shields winking in the dust, and up the far side of the ruined ranks and a piping of bone flutes, and dropping down off the sides of their mounts with one heel hung in the withers strap, and their short bows flexing beneath the outstretched necks of the ponies, until they had circled the company and cut their ranks in two, and then rising up again like funhouse figures, some with nightmare faces painted on their breasts, riding down the unhorsed Saxons and spearing and clubbing them, and leaping from their mounts with knives, and running about on the ground with a peculiar bandy-legged trot, like creatures driven to alien forms of locomotion, and stripping the clothes from the dead, and seizing them up by the hair, and passing their blades about the skulls of the living and the dead alike, and snatching aloft the bloody wigs, and hacking and chopping at the naked bodies, ripping off limbs, heads, gutting the strange white torsos, and holding up great handfuls of viscera, genitals, some of the savages so slathered up with gore they might have rolled in it like dogs, and some who fell upon the dying and sodomized them with loud cries to their fellows. And now the horses of the dead came pounding out of the smoke and dust, and circled with flapping leather and wild manes, and eyes whited with fear, like the eyes of the blind, and some were feathered with arrows, and some lanced through, and stumbling and vomiting blood as they wheeled across the killing ground, and clattered from sight again. Dust staunched the wet and naked heads of the scalped, who with the fringe of hair below their wounds and tonsured to the bone, now lay like maimed and naked monks in the blood-slaked dust, and everywhere the dying groaned and gibbered, and horses lay screaming. Paints a picture, doesn't it? Yeah, I love that passage. So those are my 3 books. Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, The Family Fang by Kevin Wilson, and The Devil in the White City by Erik, Larson. So again, this is the Wear a Mask tag created by Brian at Bookish. And I just wanted to urge all of you to do the smart and selfless and compassionate thing and wear a mask when you're in public and you're around other people. Because you might have COVID and you just don't know it. And if you have it and you're wearing a mask in a workplace, in a store, walking around downtown, the odds of you passing the virus through your breath, through your speech, through your coughing, through your sneezing, to the people around you is it's going to be greatly reduced by wearing the mask. And that's the whole damn point. That's why it's important to wear these things. They offer us some protection from the people around us, but they're more to protect the people around us. When I wear a mask, it protects the people around me. When they wear a mask, it protects me. And we should all be doing it. If everybody in Wyoming were doing it when they should be doing it, we wouldn't be having numbers of 150, 130, 160 confirmed cases a day. It'd be more like Vermont. We'd have 5 or 6. But again, the people in Wyoming don't seem to get it by and large, which sucks. But there it is. Thank you for watching. And if you have a channel, please consider doing the Wear a Mask tag, because it's fun and it's also really important. I will talk to you guys again very soon. Adios.